Last week, we talked about the 7 marks of a heart school family, and I hope that that was really helpful for you. I hope that you were able to see yourself in a lot of those and actually start to isolate the areas where maybe you don't quite hit the mark. To review, I wanted to go back through those marks because in the days ahead, we're going to be talking a lot about these different marks and how you get there, how you set up your home to really reflect these. So the first mark of a heart school family is that you recognize your call. And this is actually a pretty easy one, to be honest, because this is a much more intellectual one, right? We know that we are called primarily to parent our children. It's in these other ones where it gets real practical that sometimes we get off course, right?
Well, yeah, you're asking this question. It's bring your children to Christ, and so therefore, what will bring your children to Christ? But really, it's just recognizing the fact that your goal, your big why, is to bring your children to
Right.
Jesus Christ, which doesn't sound revolutionary to most Christians. And
Yet in practice.
yeah, but then you continue down these 7 marks, and that's when it starts really becoming radical.
Exactly. So the first one is recognizing your call. The second mark of a heart school family is to start aligning your thinking with your call. Again, this is where the kind of the rubber starts meeting the road because you start um like David just said, you start getting really radical with the way that you do things, with your priorities, with what you're shooting for, with how you set up your day, with how you deem success, and that kind of thing. And it really does start to take shape at that point as you align your thinking with your call. The third part is you start to revise or refine your vision with your calling. And this is where you're really looking ahead at what you want to see in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever, and then backing into how you get there.
So if you were to draw a picture of what the future family, your family would look like, would it look like? That's kind of what you're talking about
Right.
here in terms of refining your vision. And we're looking at a vision as you're getting very detailed.
Yeah.
And, what color are you drawing? Are you coloring all the picture in? What are you putting in that picture? And you're getting really detailed into this.
Yeah, what's the conversation like around your table in 15, 20 years? What is the dynamic of your family? What do those relationships look like, feel like? And so you're starting to allow your calling to refine that vision, and you're backing into how you're setting up all of your days to really feed that. It's so powerful when you allow that to happen. Then the fourth mark of a heart schooler is you start focusing in or refocusing in, if you've kind of lost your way, on the relationships that matter most. And this is, we talk a lot about parent child, and that's super important. But this is also husband wife and how you're working together, how you're functioning. It is your relationship with outsiders. You're really looking in order from most important being spouse to spouse, all the way down to those that are least important, and you're focusing in on what will strengthen those.
Yeah.
The fifth mark of a heart school family is that you realize your potential as a parent. And we talked a little bit about how even the data shows that if your children are in what we would now deem a traditional brick and mortar school, the number one indicator of your child's success in that school is the involvement of the parent in their life. Your role in your child's life cannot be overstated. And regardless of what culture and media and social media and everything tries to point at, God created you to be deeply involved in your child's life. And when you start to realize the potential that you have there, it can really, really, really change the way that you look at what you're doing.
So, and it's two ways, right? It's not only that the parent recognizes that they are the most important influence here on earth on their children, but it's also the other way as well, right? Your children, their most important relationship is you. And so it impacts them in a very deep way.
Yeah.
The relationships that they have with their parent, you can never get over, or it always impacts you if you have a bad relationship with your mom or your dad. I mean, it's just the fact of life. And so that is part of this realizing your potential, is that not only do you realize the potential that you have coming from your direction, but your kids are also recognizing how important you are.
Yeah.
And I actually don't believe that kids really struggle with that. They try to resist it, but they know.
Yeah.
They know that you're really important. So parents have this trouble with feeling like their kids don't want to be around them, and they may say it, but they do. They want to be around you.
Yeah.
They want to have a relationship with you. It's incredibly important to them, and you need to seize that opportunity and actually work on it.
Absolutely.
So that's part of this as well.
Right. Oh, 100%. So realizing your position and your potential as a parent is number 5. Number 6 is you're starting to build things up. You're restoring order to your home. You're getting those nuts and bolts conversations that sadly, as homeschoolers, we tend to start with. What curriculum are we going to use? How are we going to set up our day? That's where your head goes first. But really, as a mark, that's down the line. That is a result of setting a lot of these other things in order. So you start restoring order to your home and lining up your curriculum choices, the way that you order your days, what your priorities are, where, how you're doing all of this stuff based on your calling. And that removes so much friction and really does restore order in a pretty amazing way.
So you're restoring order in light of recognizing what your call is,
right?
Understanding the relationships, realizing your potential as a parent.
Right.
That's what it means. You're restoring order in that sense, because it's hard to have order, first of all, in your home without those
things
those other things being in line. And so it's really highly likely that if you don't have these things in place, there's a lot of disorder in your home anyways.
Chaos, friction.
And so now you're realizing, you're recognizing, you're seeing all these things, and then you're coming back and you're going, okay, let's put everything back in place.
Right.
You start putting everything back in place in your home.
And you start to see that piece that we talk about, that lack of confusion, lack of chaos. This is where that really starts being visible. But it's actually started back when you started shifting the way that you were looking at things. So all of these really build on one another. And then the 7th thing is, because you've done all these others, you're able to truly relish every moment of the adventure. You're able to be present in those times with your kids. You're able to lean into the decisions that you're making and know that they are feeding the vision that lines up with the calling that God has given you. And it really is such a joy-filled life that you're building, a tight-knit, godly home that you're giving your kids. And it's a pretty amazing thing.
Yeah.
So those are the 7 marks that we talked about last week. This week, we want to go a little bit deeper and really address something that is a way that a lot of people, including us, have gotten off course a little bit. We're going to look at how you gauge the success of your days in light of all of these marks. In the Heart School book, I noted that there was a quote that I gave from a lady named Ann Patchett that says that you should never be so focused on what you're looking for that you overlook the things that you find. And I think that in home education, a lot of times we get so focused on some of these things that we're looking for that may not actually be aligned with our vision and our mission and all the things that we talked about a second ago, that we overlook the amazing things that are happening day in and day out, which is what we actually find. And so that's what we're going to go into today as a little bit of, I guess, foundation for this conversation. I want to draw a line of distinction for us between the goals, the vision of a traditional brick and mortar school that really influences the way that they function, and the goals and vision of a heart schooling family, which should influence the way that we function. Because those two things are not going for the same end game.
No, so I think what we need to realize, first of all, is that people talk about failing schools all the time, and they're really not failing in the goals that they have. That's really what the truth is that your schools, the public school system, has goals that do not line up with the goals that you have. They are diametrically opposed. And so what you need to keep in mind here is that they are actually not failing. They are succeeding at what they want to do. There is a huge group of people there that are influencing the schools, and they're not all idiots. They're not all dumb. It's not that they don't know what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing. And so their goal is diametrically opposed to the goal that you have. And so when you look at their systems that they have set up in order to maintain and be able to achieve their goals, and you take those same systems and you bring them home and you don't get the results that you want, people get surprised by this because it doesn't, this doesn't work in the home.
Right.
Yet the other thing is that it's a very easy trap to fall into, because you think school, and you have an example of playing school when you were little and how much fun you had in it. And when you would play school, you had all of the desks and it looked like school.
Yeah, it looked like what I thought of as school.
And you bring that, the truth is that when you bring the systems home from the classroom and you bring it home, it doesn't necessarily work.
Right, because as David really, really well noted a minute ago, we're not going for the same thing. There was a book put out in the early 70s called Deschooling Society, and it was written by Ivan Illich, and in it he talked about a couple of things. One, he said that school is not synonymous with education, which I think is a very profound thing to remember. Just the act of doing school and the act of learning are not the same thing, and we have to remember that. The second thing that he noted was that these brick and mortar corporate schools all have an agenda. They have a reason for existing. In the United States, when they started in this bigger, kind of the public school system, it was designed for efficiencies. It was designed to really churn out factory workers, people who could do a task really well, really efficiently, and keep things progress moving. Now it feels more like their agenda is churning out what we would, good citizens in air quotes, people who think the way that they want them to think. Neither of those things, or any other type of an agenda that they may have, is churning out young men and women who know how to think biblically, who know how to think critically, who know how to learn, have a curiosity that is really innate in them, that has been born through conversation and those learning detours and getting outside and seeing the world and all of these things. That is what, as heart schoolers, we are able to give our children. We're able to not just educate their mind, which we do very, very naturally, but we are also able to educate them in a way that makes them love learning. And that is a massive difference from the outcomes that you get so often from a traditional brick and mortar school.
So, just to lean into this a little bit more, right? In homeschooling, in heart schooling, right? In heart schooling, what's happening is that you're leveraging the most important relationship that the child has.
Absolutely.
And when you send your kids off to school, you're actually separating your children from the most important relationship that they have. And so it literally is a lower form of education just because of that.
Yep.
And God made your children to want to be with their parents, right? Whatever those parents might be, because there's adoption circumstances as well. And you have to assume in those circumstances where there's adoption,
whether by birth or by choice.
That's right. God has put you into their life for a reason. And so now you are taking on that responsibility that God has brought in for the parent. And so in a traditional school, there's a separation that happens of the most important relationship. And in heart schooling situation, you're actually leveraging that because the parent is set free to do what a parent is supposed to do, which is educate and equip and enlarge and, bring about the growth and maturity of the heart of that child.
Yes.
And you're reproducing who you are. I mean, you literally are reproducing who you are. So in a way, it's almost like whether you realize it or not, whether you want to or not, you are educating that
And, well,
child.
and you are discipling that child.
That's right.
You are absolutely passing on something to that child. So you want to be really strategic with what you're doing there.
So I mean, just to also tie into what you were talking about earlier about the factory element of this. So think about the model of this is Henry Ford's factory. And when the Model T was created, it was one of the most successful cars ever created. It only came in one color. It only had one design, right? They would have workers that would do one specific task, and they would learn to do that one specific task. They were a cog in the wheel. And it would continue down the assembly line, and it would have these specialists that would work on putting the wheel on. I'm making this part up, but I mean, you can imagine what it's going to be like. This person was specialized in putting the wheel on. This person is specialized in the carburetor. This person is specialized in putting the seats in. You have an upholster specialist. And that is the way it worked. And when the Model T came off the line, they all looked the same. Right. And he did that in order to reduce the cost that it took to actually own a car. So it kind of democratized the technology, because before Henry Ford, the regular kind of person that lived in the United States or lived in Europe could not afford a car. Right. It was only the rich. And so they were able to do this factory to actually reduce the cost down, and it reduced down the choices, and it reduced down the originality.
Yeah.
And that is the model for the education system. And we're still doing that.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is, as hard schoolers, we're still trying to gauge our success based on that, based on a system that we don't even adhere to. And so what I want to spend the rest of our time on today is just really blowing that whole thing up. How do you gauge success as a homeschooler or hard schooling parent? It's not, you can't look at a checklist, a lesson planner, a curriculum, a certain GPA, whatever would be in a traditional brick and mortar school as a clear sign of successful meeting those marks. They're not the same for us. And yet, even though we are running our families in a very different way, we seem to so often go back and evaluate whether we're doing a good job based on a set of standards that we don't adhere to any of the support for them whatsoever. So no wonder we feel insecure. No wonder so many feel like they're not doing a good job. You need to change the benchmarks or the way that you gauge success of what you're doing. So I want to give you, in the few minutes that we have left, a little bit of an insight or an idea of what that may look like. Because again, for so many of us, we get to the end of the day and we're like, oh, I didn't get through math, or I didn't get through spelling, or whatever is your Achilles heel. I just, this is horrible. I had a horrible day. Nothing went right. Husband comes home and you're just gripey and frustrated. And, that yellow bus is looking better all the time. Whereas if you start looking through this different lens, I think you'll be amazed at the difference that it makes. So the first thing that I would throw out as an idea of a much better benchmark for a Heart School family is you get to the end of the day and you recognize, I know my child better than I did yesterday, or my children, or whatever. I took the time to actually engage in conversations. We did a history lesson. They freaked out over this one element of the Joan of Arc story. And so we started pulling on threads. We had this great conversation. I was able to see in their heart in a way that I never would have gotten to otherwise, as they were talking about the injustice of this. And so you're starting to really get to understand your child at a much, much deeper level. There were a lot of days then we would take conversational detours like that as a group. We'd go off the rails in the morning, and we may end up at dinner time still talking about stuff revolving around that. That is not an unsuccessful day, because during that day, not only have we discussed an awful lot of really interesting things, and the kids have learned how to find data and information to support their points and how to think critically. And we're overlaying a biblical lens into all of this. But I'm also getting a much better idea at how my children learn, how they think, what really touches them. That's really valuable as you're discipling your child.
So it's not that, the book smarts is completely unimportant.
Oh no, it grows with it.
Exactly. So what ends up happening is that your benchmark is over here, getting to know your children, and because you're getting to know your children, it actually enhances the ability to be able to bring this book knowledge and dates.
Yep.
Let's do history, for instance. Learn the dates, when this happened, and what else was going on during the. You're actually leveraging these benchmarks of getting to know your children to be able to insert the book knowledge into it. So it doesn't make it unimportant, right? It actually enhances the ability to be able to teach them even more and deeper and in a greater way.
Yeah. And, I struggled just like probably all of you listening in do. I was scared to death that my kids were not going to be ready for college, that I was failing them in some way, that there were going to be all these deficiencies and so on. This is a whisper, a lie that all of us hear in our heads. I mean, we just do. What amazed me, my 3 that have gone to college, all 3 of them came back to me separately and noted that they felt like they were more ahead than their counterparts at college because they knew how to learn. They said, and again, if one of them had said this, that's one thing, but all 3 of them came to me separately and they were like, the college professors don't give you everything. You have to fill in the gaps. We know how to do that because that's how they learned the entire way through high school, through elementary, that's how they learned. And so they were very able to keep up, to learn, to be, to show that they were learners and not just schoolgoers. They were learners. They knew how to actually think through the material. That actually helped them greatly in college. And it will help them whether college is their path or a trade or whatever is their path. You're giving them a skill that they are going to be able to flex and use to walk through whatever door God opens for them in the day ahead. And that is success as a Heart School parent.
Yes. And I mean, we have one that's actually a teacher now in a charter school. And it is a mission field like you wouldn't believe. Right. And he is able to actually function in that school setting much better than the teachers that went to school and were trained to be teachers. He's actually functioning much better. And he told me a story actually that he is checking the grammar of the other teachers, which just kind of blew me away. So I mean, that's an example of how successful this can be.
Yeah.
And not only being able to teach your kids how to learn, but beyond that, they're getting a lot more than you think they're getting.
Yeah. And I can promise you, all of those detours that we talk about, the days that would not have gone according to my planner, there were a bunch of them. Like that was probably the lion's share of my days. They didn't necessarily line up with my planner, but they did line up with my vision. They did line up with our calling. They did meet those benchmarks that we had for gauging success. So that is just one of them. Another one that you may get to the end of the day and say that you prioritized what we call the homeschool subjects over academics. You took the time to deal with character issues or to teach flexibility because something came up and you had to adjust. There are a lot of homeschool subjects.
Gratitude.
You took Honesty. The time, right, to focus in on these things that are much bigger than a specific science lesson. But what you find when you focus on those homeschool subjects, the character, all of those things, that again is enhancing their ability to do the academic subjects because God, in the way that he set up families and people to function, he lays out what is important in his word. the character, the godliness, the spiritual disciplines, all of those things, those actually enhance everything that has come along since then, which would be the math, the sciences, and so on.
Absolutely. And people do not, when you hear the justification for homeschooling and people are making an argument for homeschooling, most often, I don't want to make a blanket statement and say nobody does this. What I'm trying to say is, generally speaking, when people are making an argument for homeschooling, they start talking about how good test scores are for homeschoolers when they come back. They don't talk about this kind of stuff very much. And actually, this is the reason why you should be homeschooling. This is the number one reason. This is the huge advantage that you have over parents that make other education decisions, because you're with them more. And you have this opportunity to get into these homeschool subjects that we talk about, which is, leveraged during kind of these in-between times. There's no subject, right? There's no textbook necessarily for character. That's not going to be on a report card.
Yep.
But in homeschooling, you have the opportunity to leverage that in a way that a classroom teacher never will.
Right. Well, and the test scores actually reflect the focus on those homeschool subjects. They just do, because like I noted earlier, we're teaching our kids how to think. It's so they're not thrown by an individual question. They can think their way to an answer. So all of those things actually work together to provide success in a myriad of ways. But those day in, day out moments, we need to be looking for the right things, the things that are actually supporting our mission. Another one, and we're getting low on time, but another one is you can get to the end of the day and recognize that you as the parent grew in your walk with the Lord, and you were able to model that for your children. Some of the most powerful discipleship that David and I ever did was simply by the way that we were walking personally. It was by getting up and having our devotions and the kids seeing it. It was by the conversation that we had around the table where we were sharing what God had taught us. As we allow ourselves to share those things and to grow in the Lord personally, because you can't feed your children, you can't disciple your children something that you don't have yourself. So taking the time to prioritize your spiritual growth as a parent, and then allowing that naturally to overflow as you're discipling your children, is a mark of a successful day.
Yeah.
So we've just given you just the tip of the iceberg of some different ways that you can look at your days to gauge success. But I would encourage you, what are some of the ways that you would for you show that you've had a successful day? What are some of the new benchmarks that you need to put in place so that when you get to the end of the day, when your husband comes in and your kids dogpile him to share what they're learning, that you see that as, this is a sign of a successful day.
So there's freedom in this.
There's so much freedom and excitement and joy that comes from starting to look for the things that you're actually going to find, rather than looking for the things that the school system is going for, or another group that is not inside of your family, is not going for the same mission that you are, is looking for. We've got to stop gauging our success based on the goals and the benchmarks of the school system.
Yeah.
So that is, that's just a fact. So I encourage you to do so. Before we go, I want to encourage you, if you would like more information on this stuff, if you would like for David and I to spend more time and coach you along, we have a Heart School Parenting Intensive coming up soon. There is an application on our website. In that application, we actually give you some questions that I think would be great for everybody to start thinking through. So check the show notes for this episode. There's a link to that application. Once you fill it out, we'll send you more information on when the next cohort of the intensive is coming up, what the details are, how you can be involved, and that kind of thing. But it would be a great way for you to allow us to kind of just listen and help you think through some of these things more broadly than maybe you're able to just by listening to the podcast.
No, it's literally revolutionary.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
been
when we
great.
have gone through this with other families, what ends up happening, you can actually see the lights come on because the way that they've been homeschooling and the way that they have gauged the success in their days has been really it's a habit that's hard to break.
Well, it sucks the life out
And
of
it
you
sucks the
too.
life out of
Yeah.
you because there's idolatry that's there and you don't even realize it.
Yep.
And this actually provides order in your home. It provides an opportunity and it actually increases the leverage that you have in developing relationships with your
Yeah.
kids. So this really changes the way your homeschool
Yep.
operates.
It
Okay.
does.
And there's a tremendous amount of freedom in this. And so I encourage you if I think and when I was hearing you go through these 7 marks, there might be families out there that are heart schooling that have not called it heart schooling
Right.
in the
Oh, for
past.
sure. 100%.
There might be families out there that may be doing this and have the right why,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they have realized their potential and they have started to set up the right goals and they are not afraid of doing these detours. And so they're doing this without even realizing. So we're talking about it and they're going, yeah, we do this. One of the signs, I think, of you being a heart schooler, and you're a heart schooler, you don't even realize it, is actually look at the order in your home. And I'm not
Mm-hmm.
talking about is your home,
Pristine all the
pristine,
time.
it looks like
You live there, we get it.
yeah, it looks like a museum when you walk through it. That's not that I'm not trying to say restore order in that sense. What I'm talking about is that it is chaotic constantly. And again, not busy because every homeschool, every home is busy. I'm talking about it is arguments constantly. People are at each other's throats. Mom and dad are not on the same page.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about there is no order in that home at all.
I don't
That
even think it needs to be
that
that deep. I think a lot of times that friction, that lack of order doesn't necessarily show up in constant arguments and stuff.
yeah,
It's just things
unfulfilling.
aren't things aren't moving right. There's chaos and you can't quite put your finger on it. Those sometimes it's just a really subtle thing, but it's not there.
So
It's not right.
so this lack of order is actually an indicator, a very strong indicator on what your goal is,
Yeah.
what you are pursuing. Are you running a heart school? Do you have these 7 marks? The one that stands out the most to people is this lack of order because it becomes obvious across the board. And sometimes, actually, often, the lack of order is seen from people from the outside. Even they see it and they're like, "Wow, there's a lot of craziness there." And this lack of order is a strong indicator. And so I say that because should you fill out this application, if you feel like there's a lack of order in your home, you should definitely go and fill out this application because what we're going through here will actually help you in a big way.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Also in the show notes, we will give you links to get the book, the Heart School book. That's a great overview, give you some more insight as well. And then I just want to personally invite you, join us in May at one of our events. We'll be in Pigeon Forge. The first part of May will be in Branson at the end. So I hope that you will join us there, and I look forward to talking to you again real soon.